7 Days, the Week, by Benjamin Lockwood. The world beyond that of the living is often categorized as either extremely good or extremely bad. In reality, it is what we, the spirits, make of our existence here in the hereafter, and far too many allow themselves to become weighed down in solitude and bitterness, instead of realizing that they are, in fact, dead. Day 1. The ceiling fan circulated slowly overhead, doing little to nothing at all to keep the room cool. In the near-deserted bar, sun rays shone through the cracked windows and half-closed shutters, revealing the dancing particles of dust that weave to and fro throughout the air. A man sits alone at the counter, deathly still. His eyes closed, left hand clenched around a dingy glass of a pitiful, watered-down excuse of whiskey, whilst holding a still-burning cigarette between his fingers at the rim. The smoke rises in a slim, continuous column, wafting into his unshaven face and tattered hair. The beaten jukebox in the corner plays some old, forgotten song so lightly one almost couldn't hear it, the sound drifting in with the humming of the fan and the buzzing of the world's most annoying fly. A tired, bloodshot eye shifts to look at the glass once the buzzing stops, to see the fly sitting on the rim. With a sigh, the man raises the glass to his lips, causing the pest to fly away once again and resume his damnable buzzing. With a straightened breath through the nose, the man gulps back a swallow of the pig swill from his glass, some of the brown liquid trickling down the corner of his mouth and rolling against the thick stubble on his face. There must be some amount of alcohol in the beverage, lest it wouldn't burn as it did. Yet still, he did not care enough to wipe the stinging sensation away. Buzz, buzz. The fly continues, and the man trailed him as best he could. Buzz, buzz. The fly stopped, landing in the ashes of the ashtray right beside his cigarette, and the man paused. He stared at the fly. As the fan blade roamed over him, the tiny, flying bug seemed to be interested in something in the tray and was completely and utterly preoccupied with whatever it was, be it a stray fleck of tobacco or an overwhelmed set of senses due to the ash itself. Either way, the man would never be able to tell. Not now, not in a million years. His hand jerked, driving the burning ember onto the fly. One might almost swear they could hear screams as its body was crushed and charred. The man tilted his head, raising the cigarette before his eyes and inspecting the scene, almost grisly in nature. The fly's leg and wing twitched, and the man, for the first time in hours, allowed the tiniest hint of a smile to creep across his dry and peeled lips, before bringing the filter to his mouth and inhaling deeply, engulfing the corpse in flames, and partaking of the thick, noxious smoke which permeated his lungs and nostrils. He held it in for quite some time, reveling silently in his victory over that which had disheartened him so. Finally, he exhaled in a plume of smog, before looking back to his glass and seeing another fly. There is a certain sorrowful sound to be had in the stillness and quiet of death, that one often loses the opportunity to take advantage of the calm and reflect upon their inner being. It is perhaps something akin to being unable to see the forest for the trees. Day 2. Whenever it was, or perhaps wherever it was, when the scene before his foggy eyes began to take shape, the man could not say. all around him appeared to melt away as if a great ethereal ooze, and just as quickly reformed itself in a vaporous display of overwhelming disbelief. The hot and stifling atmosphere of the bar had long since passed him by, transforming gradually as the entirety of minutes waxed and waned with the chirping of birds and bugs. Thick, long ropes of Spanish moss hung from the trees, waving along in the cold evening breeze, as if to beckon him forward with naught to light his way, save for the ember glow of dancing fireflies that clashed with the moonlight. His boot sank into the murky bog as he entered the swamp, and yet despite the resolute sensation of wetness and cold, he felt completely dry, unchanged, almost as if the sensation itself were a mere memory instead of an actual presence. The man gazed up and about the darkened surroundings as he pulled a matchbook from his pocket to relight his cigarette. Strange, he thought it was, how he never seemed to run short of smokes and matches, and yet he couldn't bring himself to ponder as to why that may be. Simply it was, for him, and so he accepted it with as much questioning as the sky questions the cloud, or vice versa. What he did question, however, was the abhorrent buzzing of the fly which seemed to linger in his ear. All other sounds around him rolled on like a low thunder, a mere faded whisper of their supposed nature, whilst the fly rang true as a bell, its incessant wings producing that all-encompassing noise, both loud and clear enough to drive the mind mad and feverish with surmounting agitation, till it boils over into a blind and unrelenting fury. The man swatted at the fly, his arms flung wide in an arc that caused both his reflection in the muddy water and his shadow from the moonlight to dance in time with him as he acted out this ballet. With every wave of his wrist or swinging of his arm, the fly merely danced its own dance, weaving in and out of harm's way, utterly and completely ebullient in contrast to the raging man whose temper soon claimed its first victim. His reflection morphed and shuddered in the water as he kicked and flailed, wrenching loose his foot and stomping like an ox across the way, now screaming in spite at the pest which followed close behind. Buzz, buzz, it fluttered. Buzz, buzz. The man shouted profanities in frustration as he claimed his second victim, this time his shadow, for he waded from the water, still ever dry and never wet, onto shore and beneath the overhanging moss and cover of darkness which it offered, altogether stifling the moon's blanketing glow from his figure. Finally, he saw his chance, and his hand came crashing down upon his chest, crushing the fly beneath his palm. He did not smile this time, no, for there was no satisfaction to be had in his conquest. He merely sighed and slid to the muddy ground between two great roots and took in the silence of the night. Buzz, buzz. His bloodshot eyes opened, and there sat a fly, perched upon his knee. The echoes of eternity may pass us by in the mere passage of a moment, perhaps even as subtle and smooth as a whisper, tickling along the back of our neck, yet still we must give credence unto the shapeless unknown, lest we forever remain ignorant of its meaning. Day 3. Rain, wind, cold, and bitter dampness laying itself upon the world like a blanket that stretches out for an endless mile, is all that surrounds the man in this empty void. He could not remember how long he had been walking, nor could he hazard a guess as to how far he had traveled, but through every step, every stumble, every slip and fall, his one constant and unrelenting companion proved to be the only thing driving him onward like an ox before the whip. Buzz, buzz. This small, insignificant, atrocious, curious, cruel, and unforgiving thing had hounded him with seemingly unending vigor. Surely there would be some respite, some reprieve from the torment burdened upon his soul. Why this, a mere fly, a vermin in every sense of the word, would have such power of madness and depravity, he could not say. Surely he would go insane, he thought. Surely the monster's interest in him would fade, and it would simply play the part of its very nature and fly away. Fly away from here, off to some assuredly deserved misfortune in parts unknown, far, far from sight or mind. Buzz, buzz. The man's hand carelessly waved at the creature, as he had done so now many times. No longer did he seek an end to its horrible and misbegotten life. No. Now merely peace and respite from its constant and bombastic presence would surely serve as satisfactory, yet to no avail. The fly would not cease, nor be dissuaded. The man found himself begging, crawling on the ground and groveling like a dog out of sheer frustration. Would nothing serve to rid himself of this troublesome nuisance? Would there be no rest for his ragged form? He found his muddy fingers pulling and ripping at his own hair, his teeth gritting together that his gums began to bleed. Now the words sputtered forth from his throat as he pleaded, no, bargained with the fly, offering it anything the wretched little abomination could possibly want, if only it would leave him be, if only it would see fit to return his senses to him, for he knew he had lost them. Buzz, buzz. The fly came swift and true as it darted in and landed upon his forehead in nothing short of sheer indifference to his plight. The beast almost seemed to ponder his feeble attempt at parley. It almost seemed as if the fly were judging him, the glassy orbs of its eyes peering and leering at him with a mocking sense of pity. Buzz, 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 buzz. This is all it said, to a man so low as to haggle with a pest. I recall a time as a child when I would be scolded for disobeying the rules, yet praised, in part, for failing to follow the orders given unto me by those whose rules made little sense to those who kept me. I suppose, upon reflection, that the only misdirection came in from the stern correction that rules are made by fools, and those that follow may be ghouls. Day 4. The rain and fog encompassed him now, a solemn reminder of his endless drift through the haze of uncertainty and doubt. How long had it been? The man did not know, for he had long since lost the will to count or recall. Ever inward, ever upward, ever trudging through the hedges, his boots sank deeply into the mucky earth, and yet never did the bitterness of damp seem to trouble him. He knew that he was wet, or at least believed he should be, going even so far as to stop a time or two and dry himself off, though it made little difference, as the physical sensation never truly seemed to apply, and the emotional indifference grew by the hour. In truth, he could be up to his eyeballs in the deep, murky waters of the bog without ever realizing he had begun to sink. Buzz, buzz. Yes. And then the fly. An entirely inhospitable companion whose once incessant beating of the wings had slowly turned to a numbness of feeling within the man's ear. To be sure, he wished himself rid of the pest in question, yet so seldom did it strike the mark that he gave little bother to that which once vexed him so greatly. No more yelp nor pangs did he deem worthy of hurling towards his great adversary. Only a simple tear, here or there, would he shed when he could, though in truth the man began to doubt whether or not his eyes betrayed him, as so much rain had fallen that he could not say if the water streaming down his face belonged to himself or the sky. No, No, it was a curious thing, an exhausting thing, an utterly demoralizing and repulsive thing, a thing which he could not say but only feel, the emptiness of depth and void which filled him now, sinking ever deeper with each muddy footfall. He looked back a time to see where he had tread, yet only to see the water's surface had completely engulfed his every step, leaving no trace of his ever being there to the naked eye. Truth be told, he had not seen nor heard any sight nor sound of anyone or anything besides the fly, and the mere thought of the only living creature who might remember him would be that loathsome insect churned his stomach to such a degree that he forced himself from the murky waters and crawled on hands and knees to the boggy shore, where he fell upon his side and wept in silent tears of his gray and desolate agony. Buzz, Buzz. A teary eye opened to see the fly perched upon the back of his hand, staring at him. Buzz. He sniffled, peering back his would-be antagonist, with not so much as an ounce of strength left in him. The two companions shared a moment of silence, a peaceful moment, full of strange and lulling bliss that almost seemed to pierce the veil between them, when finally, Buzz. A glimmer of hope is all that one may ever truly wish for in this waking world of ours, for without it, one may never know the intoxicating sensation of seeing their dreams come to fruition. Day 5. The hands of time move ever onward, never once looking back upon the hour, minute, or even second where they once stood. So too does our man, who drags his aching frame one footfall after another through the unending haze which had slowly turned from a fog of mist into a valley of smoke. Where once rested a desolate bog now climbed steadily into a craggy incline which he neither welcomed nor turned away. As a matter of fact, none of these changes seemed even to faze the man, almost as if to say that nothing mattered within the dream of his existence. Yet something clearly did matter to him, for he felt if it did not matter, then surely he would not press on as he did. Perhaps he is right. Perhaps there is something here which drives him, something which renders the strength and purpose to move his heavy and tired limbs up and over each next horizon, and to take them all in stride, simply as they come. Sitting down for but a moment on a rock, he realized that he could not remember the last time he laid eyes upon the haunting marsh in which he had lingered for so long. Nor scarcely could he recall the sensation of rain, the scent of mud, or the biting damp. Even less so could he recall the once familiar bar in which he had started his journey. The realization of this perplexed him, vexed him, and utterly bewildered him to no particular end. Drawing a cigarette from his shirt pocket, more so out of sheer habit than actually recalling that he had any with him, the man similarly produced a lighter from his other pocket and struck the flint, sparking a flame, into which he peered for a time before indulging in his habit with an almost satisfactory sensation of relief. It seemed odd to him that he could practically feel, if not outright enjoy, the realism of inhaling the smoke into his lungs. Perhaps it is not everyone's chosen hobby, but for him it had always been a comfort in times of stress, and one might even go so far as to say he took a certain level of delight in watching the plumes of smoke mingle with the mist that hung so heavily in the valley, his tired eyes almost smiling as the two forms of vapor danced around one another like performers on a stage. Buzz, Buzz. The smile faded, and his eyes wandered from the plumes to the fly, which sat perched perfectly upon his shoulder. Why must this pest continue to ruin everything sweet to him? Why must this thing add such a bite of bitterness to this tiny speck of a moment simply by existing? The man did not know. Yet what he did know is that perhaps now, in the light of the recent changes in climate, that if he were to somehow push forward just a little bit more, he would find the respite which he so desperately craved. Buzz. He snubbed his cigarette upon the rock on which he himself was sitting, and stood, stretched the ragged limbs of his body with a melody of creaking bones and popping joints, before heading off for the next rise in his path. He did not know if this was in fact the solution to his problem, but strangely, now he felt some sense of determination to at least try to find out. After all, what did he truly have left to lose? Beauty and grace are the hallmarks of elegance and purity. Day 6. Higher and higher he rose through the winding cliffside path carved along the mountain's edge. He was so high up it made his head spin, and yet never once did the man feel uneasy about his purpose. Looking back, he could see the blanket of fog that layered itself atop the valley where he had been some days, or moments, or years ago. He wasn't entirely sure of the time it had taken him to push forward up this rocky terrain, but he wouldn't stop to ponder such trifles as time any more. He knew it didn't seem to matter anyway. Buzz, buzz. The fly perched upon his shoulder as he crawled across the boulder, and a scene did then unfold there which he could scarcely believe. He smiled, fearing that he had lost his companion. His companion whom he hated and disdained with every sense and semblance of malice and fury that one man might muster. He smiled, as even he, though perhaps loath to admit it, or even shamed to admit it, had grown fond of the fly and of its company. Some time during the climb he realized that every stone he took hold of which the fly did not perch upon crumbled, and every stone which the fly did perch upon held true. He was his guide. How long had he scorned this beast of burden, this unholy and indecent and malicious and contemptible vermin, for the sheer audacity of its insufferable existence. This tiny fly was none of those things. It was his friend. It was his boon companion, and perhaps the high altitude had driven him mad, or the endless trudgery had finally whittled away the last of his senses, but he did not care, nor any longer did he presume to understand the creature. Merely to accept him, and love him for what he was. A fly. Plain and simple. Simple and plain. Extraordinarily ordinary in this strange and entire alien world in which he finds himself. Perhaps that was the truest purpose of the fly, to bring him some reminder of the mundane world which now seemed to the man like a distant dream far beyond the greatest reaches of his mind, and yet always so close at hand he could swear he tasted it. At last the man crests the final peak, and reached a great expansive plateau overlooking the ocean. The wind was blowing, the sun was shining, the fresh, clean sea breeze wafted in the air and danced elegantly with the sound of crashing waves upon the rock. There, just ahead of him, against the edge, was a tree, bent and gnarled with age, but beautiful to behold. Its roots clung to the cliff on the side facing him and hung out over the water on the other. A tear came to the man's eye, and he turned to his friend, his companion, his comrade against this great adversity, and held the fly aloft at his palm, where he kissed its little wings in appreciation. But the fly did not move, nor buzz even once. The fly was dead. All things, in time, must one day end, and all things ended must one day begin anew. Day 7. The man stared at the motionless corpse of the fly. He stared at its tiny wings and prismatic eyes, its curled-up legs and dark, shimmering body, as tears began to roll down the man's grizzled face. Sun-beaten and weather-worn, His tears were cascading down his cheeks into the thick stubble and dropping off the bottom of his quivering chin and into his palm, like raindrops falling upon the minuscule frame of the fly and pooling around its body. "Why?" the man croaked, the first words he had uttered since a time before time itself. "Why? Why?" He clenched his fist tightly around the body as he shook to the core. How much pain, how much anger, how much hatred and cruelty and malice and resentment and disgust had he heaped upon this tiny, innocent creature during its life before coming to realize just how important, how great a blessing the fly had been to him, only to have that short spark of reprieve snuffed out like a cigarette in the ashtray. Like a cigarette in the ashtray. The man fell to his knees and wept. He howled out a silent cry, for all sense and sound had left him now. Only the wailing doom of his soul clung to the man. Like the doldrums of winter, he faded and wilted down onto the ground, curled into a tiny ball. The man had given up. "Do not ask why," he heard a voice say unto him from the tree. The man sat up sharply, looking about in fright. "Do not ask why, for you already know the answer." The man's eyes went wide with great sense of fear and dread. It was no other living thing speaking to him. It was the tree itself. "You have come far and endured much. You have existed in this world of non-existence and braved the greatest trials I have to offer you. Yes, I have offered them to you, and I have guided you, have I not?" The man looked back to the fly and back again to the tree. "You know the truth to your ever-burning question. You've been stunned by it. You've denied its existence. You have raged against its reality. You have bartered for reason, drowned in its despair, and constantly pushed forward to find the truth that you know in your heart you have always held within yourself." Warmth seemed to pour over the man. True and genuine warmth, not just a memory, but the real thing, for the first time since he woke up inside that bar. For the first time since he died. "The time has come for you to accept this truth. The time has come for you to leave this place for greener pastures, and step out from beneath the veil of this world which you have conjured for yourself. All things, in time, must one day end, and all things ended must one day begin anew. Surely you wish to step forward one final time and leave the pain behind you." The man sniffled sharply as he loosed a trembling breath. He did know the truth. He'd known since before he could recall knowing, and he recalled knowing since before he had forgotten to recall. "I am ready," he said, and took a step before looking down at the fly in his hand. But the body was gone, and so too were all of his fears and doubts and trepidation along with it. He sniffled again and looked back towards the tree. The sun was rising across the ocean, and its golden rays shone through the gnarled and bare branches, blinding the man. He held aloft his hand to block the light from his eyes, and then he was gone. Only a small flower remained where he stood. One flower among many, swaying in the breeze.